Jake Morrison stood sentinel at the transparent membrane of his cell, his digits, weathered like a discarded sleeve, clenched around a vessel of cooling dregs. Below, the street lay stagnant, a grey artery of horizon lane that pulsed with the predictable rhythm of a failing heart. At 50 years of habitation, the meat of his existence had hardened into a groove, a rut carved by the relentless ticking of the chronometer upon the mantle, that small, mechanical god that measures out the slow rot of the soul. He exhaled a breath that tasted of stale carbon, setting aside the cup to sheath his hands in the rough hide of gardening gloves. There was a grim necessity in the dirt. The roses, at least, required his labor to mask the scent of the grave. The sun, a burning orbital eye, scorched his thinning scalp as he knelt in the grit. He had just begun the ritual pruning when the low-frequency thrum of a transport vibrated through his marrow. It came to rest at the adjacent lot. Curiosity, that ancient itch, drew him to the perimeter. New tenants. It had been an age since fresh blood had entered this sector. He watched as Laboris hauled forth impossible geometries, furniture that defied the eye and orbs that pulsed with a bioluminescent fever. Then, a figure stepped from the shadows of the hold, and Jake felt the familiar failure of his breath. She stood tall, a spire of 6 feet, her limbs possessed of a fluid grace that mocked the clumsy biology of men. But it was the shroud she wore, her skin, that betrayed the ghost within. It shimmered with a radiance not of this sun, a shifting chrome of the spirit. She turned, and her eyes, wells of deep, digital violet, bored through him, stripping the privacy from his very core. He retreated behind the barricade of the fence, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. An alien, a sovereign of the stars, had taken residence in the dirt. Jake? Art thou whole, neighbor? The voice of Abuela Elena cracked the silence, a relic of a woman peering from her porch with a gaze etched in ancient concern. I am intact, Jake lied, his voice a ghost. Didst thou see? Elena nodded, her pupils blown wide with the terror of the sublime. Never have these eyes witnessed such a breach. Should we summon the iron fist of the law? Before the air could cool around his answer, a melody broke across the divide, a voice like silk pulled over razor wire. Greetings, dwellers of the dust. I am Xylara. I trust my arrival has not fractured the peace of your station. Jake stood, his joints protesting the sudden elevation, and looked upon the celestial intruder. Close, she was a cathedral of light. Her skin throbbed with an internal furnace, casting a halo upon the grey soil. I am Jake, he rasped, the words feeling heavy and unrefined. Welcome to the sector. Xylara's violet apertures narrowed in a mockery of human warmth. My gratitude, Jake. I seek the communion of this place. There was a weight to her tone, a gravity that pulled at his blood and forced a flush to his weary face. He cleared the grit from his throat. From which star system hast thou drifted? Vesper IV, she replied, as if naming a nearby borough. A distant shore, far beyond the reach of your telescopes. Abuela Elena had crept to the fence line, her jaw slack. By the heavens, she hissed. Xylara turned the brilliance of her gaze upon the crone. And thou art Elena Santoro. I perceive the scent of tribute. I prepared a welcome pie, Elena stammered, offering the dish like a votive. Xylara reached, her digits brushing Jake's forearm in the transition. A surge of raw voltage ignited his nerves, a digital fire that made him gasp. Her eyes locked onto his, ancient and knowing. I trust we shall forge a bond of significance, Jake, she purred. He swallowed the bile of his uncertainty. This was no ordinary dawn. The sun had risen on a world he no longer recognized. The passing cycles found Jake a prisoner of his own window, his gaze drawn to the specter next door. He tracked Xylara as she moved, a ghost in the machinery of her yard, or reclining upon her porch like a fallen queen. More than once, he felt the prickle of her violet stare upon his back, a sensory input he could not filter. Their commerce began in the gutter, a hand raised in silent salute, a curt benediction at the postbox. But soon, the alien sought the man. One afternoon, as Jake bathed his roses in recycled water, she appeared at the iron boundary. Thy flora possesses a tragic beauty, she remarked, her voice a low frequency in the air. On Vesper IV, the gardens sing as they bleed into bloom. Perhaps I shall grant thee a hearing. Jake nearly fumbled the hose, his pulse spiking. That would be a revelation. Xylara's smile was a sharp edge of white. Then it is a covenant. Prepare thyself. She vanished into the shimmer of her own light, leaving him drowning in the silence of his own boredom. The following sun saw Jake at his labor, shearing the hedges like a man grooming a beast, when a cry of frustration breached the fence. He looked over to find Xylara embroiled in a struggle with a pulsating mass of vegetation. "Dost thou require an extra limb?" he called, the words out before the fear could check them. She looked up, the bioluminescence of her face flared with relief. "Jake, yes. This ether vine possesses a stubborn spirit." He breached the gate, his boots crunching on soil that now felt foreign. The alien garden was a labyrinth of glowing stalks and iridescent leaves. The vine in her grasp thrummed with a low, predatory heat. "Direct me," Jake commanded, stepping into the fray. She pointed to the base of the writhing mass. "Hold the trunk steady while I secure the roots." As his gloved hands closed around the fiber, a warmth like liquid copper surged through his sleeves. He flinched, his nerves screaming. "Steady, Jake," she laughed, the sound like falling glass. "It merely seeks to acknowledge thy presence." He watched, mesmerized, as she worked with a surgeon's precision, her movements a fluid dance that blurred the line between the organic and the engineered. "It is bound," Xylara declared, standing triumphant. She turned to him, her eyes burning with an inner violet fire. "Thy labor is noted, neighbor. Such kindness is a rare currency in this wasteland." She stepped into the sanctuary of his personal space, and the air grew thick with a scent like ozone and crushed jasmine. His head spun. "It was a hollow service," he murmured, his voice cracking like dry earth. Her gaze lingered on the pulse in his neck, a predatory curiosity in her eyes. "Come, drink with me. I have a vintage from the deep systems that may soothe thy weary meat." Jake knew the danger. He knew he was a moth circling a cold, fusion flame. But the rut of his life was deep, and Xylara was the only path out. "I will drink," he said. Her smile was a blinding flash. "Then enter, and behold." As he crossed her threshold, he felt the weight of the old world fall away, replaced by a fear that felt remarkably like life. The interior was a sanctuary of high-stakes aesthetics, a fusion of primitive wood and bleeding-edge tech. Orbs of cold light drifted like ghosts near the rafters, illuminating a space that felt less like a home and more like a bridge of a ship. "Assume a state of rest," Xylara commanded, gesturing to a couch that looked as though it were grown from obsidian. As he sat, the material shifted, molding to his spine with a terrifying intimacy. Xylara retreated to a station of bubbling glass and humming processes. "Tell me, Jake," she began, her back turned. "What keeps a man anchored to this gray sector? Why Earth, and why this stagnant suburb?" Jake's throat felt like it was filled with ash. "Curiosity," he replied, mirroring her earlier sentiment. "A man grows tired of his own skin. And thou? Why this gutter of the galaxy?" She turned, a shimmering glass in each hand, her eyes locked on his. "I had a premonition that I would find a specimen of interest here. A soul that had not yet been fully digitized by despair." She handed him a vessel of opalescent fluid. "Consume. It is a catalyst for the senses." Jake tasted the liquid. It was a riot of sensation, bitter as bile, sweet as a dying star, dancing upon his tongue with a physical presence. Heat bloomed in his chest, a solar flare that scorched the dampness of his old life. "It is potent," he managed to say. Xylara leaned in, her scent a heavy cloak around him. "I would have thee show me the ruins of thy city, Jake. I wish to see the world through thy primitive optics, to experience the decay with one who has inhabited it." The request was a blade wrapped in velvet. Jake felt himself nodding, the chemical fire in his blood drowning out the warnings of his intellect. He was a king of the gutter, and she was a traveler seeking the truth in the grime. Then the pact is sealed, Xylara cried, her hands coming together with a sharp report that sent ripples of light cascading across her skin. A date, in the dialect of your people. The word date hung in the air like a death sentence. Jake's mind was a storm of antithesis. He was a creature of bone and rot, and she was a vessel of light. Could the meat love the chrome? As if reading the code of his thoughts, she placed a hand upon his sleeve. The electricity was a brutalist symphony now, a heavy thrumming that shook his core. "Jake," she whispered, "do not fear the breach. There is a primal resonance between us. I felt it the moment our orbits crossed." He looked into the violet abyss of her eyes and saw a reflection of his own hunger. "I felt it too," he confessed, the truth a heavy burden. "But this is a tragedy in the making, Xylara. We are of different worlds, different fates." Her smile was a cynical tilt of the head. "The best stories are written in the blood of impossible things, Jake. Do we not feel more alive when the routine is shattered?" Her words struck him with the weight of an orbital bombardment. For how many decades had he been a ghost in his own machine? Before he could respond, a thunderous resonance from the exterior rattled the glass. Jake moved to the window, Xylara a shimmering shadow at his shoulder. In the yard, the alien flora had abandoned all pretense of dormancy. The vines writhed like serpents, pulsing with a bioluminescent fever as they breached the iron fence. "By the gods," Xylara breathed. "The atmosphere of this planet. It acts as a stimulant to their core." Jake watched as his world was consumed by the sublime. "Is this the end?" "Not the end, Jake. Merely a transformation. But there are things I must disclose." Her confession was cut short by a scream of pure, primitive terror. Abuela Elena stood at the edge of the chaos, her prize petunias strangled by glowing tendrils. "What madness is this?" she shrieked. Jake looked at the destruction, then at the woman of light beside him. The predictability of his life had been burned away, and in its place was a beautiful, terrifying void. Xylara's hand sought his, her digits like hot wires against his skin. "We must pacify the locals," she suggested, "and then, Jake, we must speak of the meat and the light." They stepped into the Garden of Thorns, a king and his consort facing the neon-lit apocalypse of the suburbs. The street buzzed with an energy that tasted of ozone and ancient secrets. As they approached the trembling Elena, the plants pulsed with a heavy, rhythmic throb, a heartbeat from another world. "Peace, Elena," Jake commanded, his voice finding a resonance it had long lacked. "We shall find the solution." Xylara stepped into the glow, her skin blazing with a brilliance that blinded the old woman. "I offer my regrets, Elena Santoro. My garden merely responds to the hunger of your son." Elena gaped, her mind fracturing under the weight of the visual input. "Thou art not of the flesh." Xylara's smile was a flicker of violet. "I am a Vesper IV, and I fear I have brought the storm with me." A street light nearby groaned and detonated, a shower of sparks raining down like falling stars. Jake pulled Xylara into the hollow of his shoulder, the contact a brutal, electric bliss. "This is a violation," Elena cried, her hand fumbling for her communicator. "I shall summon the peacekeepers." "Hold thy hand," Jake barked, the authority of his new life surging. He turned to Xylara. "Canst thou quell this fever?" Xylara bit her lip, a gesture that seemed almost human in its vulnerability. "I shall attempt a synchronization." She closed her eyes, her face becoming a mask of high-tension focus. The air vibrated with a low-frequency hum that set Jake's teeth on edge. Slowly, the vines withdrew, their bioluminescence fading into a dull throb. Elena gasped as the alien flora retreated, leaving in its wake a carpet of flowers that shimmered with an impossible, intoxicating light. "Sublime," Jake whispered. Xylara opened her eyes, the violet deep and weary. "The balance is restored, for this cycle." Elena, her terror replaced by a sudden, senile wonder, knelt to touch the new blooms. Jake looked to Xylara. "The truth, now. No more metaphors." She met his gaze, the light in her skin flickering like a dying lamp. "It is the meat, Jake. It is the blood. We must seek sanctuary. He nodded, the hunger for the secret outweighing the fear of the cost. Elena, go to your hearth. We have work to do. Xylara took his hand, her grip a cold, digital clamp. Thy cell or mine? Mine, Jake replied, the word a heavy stone. As they entered his dwelling, the familiar smells of wood and stale coffee felt like a shroud. Xylara moved through the space with the grace of an apex predator. Thy world is so quiet, Jake. So filled with the silence of the grave. Jake stood by the hearth. Speak. What is this resonance? It is a cycle, she began, her gaze fixed on the distance. A time of intense biological imperative. We call it the resonance, a search for a compatible frequency. The hunger becomes a physical weight, a burden on the soul. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. And thou art in the grip of this hunger. She nodded, a flush of violet coloring her neck. I came to this primitive rock seeking silence, but the frequency here, it is loud, Jake, and it is focused on thee. Jake reeled. But why me? I am but an aging sleeve, a man of rot and routine. Xylara laughed, a sound like silver coins. Everything on Vespera is connected, Jake. My physical state bleeds into the world around me. And right now, the world is screaming thy name. The lamp beside them flared into a blinding brilliance, casting Xylara as a vengeful goddess. Jake felt the pull of her, a gravity that threatened to snap his bones. So every emotion thou feelest, it rewrites the world. Yes, she whispered, stepping into his orbit. And lately, Jake, the rewrite has been a tragedy of desire. She reached out, her fingers tracing the map of his weathered face. The contact was a violent sensory overload. Let me show thee the depth of the hunger. Before he could draw breath, she claimed his mouth. The world shattered into a million shards of light. He was falling through a digital abyss, his soul stripped of its meat and cast into the chrome. Every nerve in his sleeve ignited in a symphony of agony and ecstasy. When they parted, gasping for the thin air of earth, Jake saw that his living room had become a jungle of bioluminescent blossoms. The walls throbbed with a pink, pulsing light, a physical manifestation of her desire. Gods, Jake breathed. That was but the opening act, Xylara replied, her eyes burning with a fire that scorched his soul. The following cycles were a blur of high-stakes intimacy and environmental collapse. Xylara was a storm that would not break, her presence a constant pressure upon his psyche. One evening, beneath the cold gaze of the stars, she sat up, her skin a blinding white. I would grant thee a word, Jake, a key to my core. He looked up, his senses dulled by the constant input. Speak it. She leaned in, her breath smelling of ozone. Xyron, she whispered. The syllables were a physical force. The grass beneath them bowed as if before a king, and the air grew thick with glowing spores. It means, the one who shall consume my heart. Jake's blood ran hot. Xylara, a crash from the neighbor's lot broke the spell. They breached the fence to find Elena's feline, Mochi, suspended in the air, its fur glowing a neon blue. The resonance spreads, Xylara murmured, her voice laced with a cynical regret. The environment can no longer contain the overflow. As they retrieved the glowing beast, Jake felt the weight of the future pressing down. The neighborhood was becoming a landscape of alien anomalies, streetlights dancing, weather patterns that defied logic, and the constant thrum of Xylara's hunger. He was a man drowning in a sea of light, and he wasn't sure he wanted to be saved. One afternoon, as he attempted to prune the hedges that now sang in the wind, he found Xylara experimenting with orbs of suspended water. One orb detonated, drenching them in a liquid that tasted of mercury and salt. Jake laughed, a jagged sound. Perhaps Earth's physics are too stubborn for thy magic. Xylara's laughter was a low hum, but the mirth died quickly, replaced by a dark, heavy frequency. Jake, she said, her voice a low vibration in his chest. The time of choosing is upon me. The resonance has reached its zenith. I have no more time, Jake. I must select a partner, a frequency to anchor my soul, or the energy will consume me, and this sector with it. She looked at him, her violet eyes a desperate plea. I would have it be thee. Jake felt the world tilt. I am a man of dust, Xylara. Thou art a star. How can the meat survive the fusion? I love thee, Jake, in the brutal, visceral way of my people. The plants around them surged upward, a wall of green and light that shut out the world. The air was a static charge that made Jake's hair stand on end. And if I refuse? Her glow dimmed, a tragic graying of her chrome. Then the energy becomes a bomb, Jake. A rupture in the fabric of this place. I will bleed out, and take thy world with me. The cynicism of the situation was not lost on him. He was the only thing keeping the apocalypse at bay. Jake looked at the rut of his old life, then at the shimmering goddess before him. Tell me the cost, he commanded. What must I sacrifice of my meat to join thy light? Xylara's face blazed with a sudden, fierce hope. Not a sacrifice, Jake. A synchronization. As she spoke, the vines began to weave a sanctuary around them, a throne of light for a king of the gutter. Beneath the setting sun, Jake sat upon his porch, his mind a battlefield of antithesis. The Ellison bond was a permanent rewrite of his code. He looked at his hands, weathered, gray, dying, and then at the house next door, which pulsed with the vibrant heat of a new sun. A knock at the door signaled the end of his deliberation. Xylara stood there, her glow a soft, anxious throb. May I enter? He stepped aside. The air in the room crackled as she passed. They sat upon the obsidian couch, the distance between them a heavy void. Thy verdict? She asked. Jake looked at the ceiling, where the glowing orbs drifted like silent witnesses. I am terrified, Xylara. A month ago, I was a ghost. Now, I am asked to become a god, or a casualty. Xylara turned away, her light fading to a dull gray. Then I shall leave this place. I shall seek the void elsewhere. No, Jake barked, reaching for her hand. The heat was a brutal, beautiful reality. I will not return to the silence. I am a man of rot, but I would rather burn with thee than fade in the rut. I am thy partner, Xylara. Let the rewrite begin. The room exploded. Xylara's skin blazed like a detonating star, and every fiber of the house burst into bioluminescent bloom. Jake felt a surge of energy that stripped the meat from his bones and replaced it with a fire that tasted of the deep systems. She threw herself into his arms, her touch a cascade of electric bliss. Thou hast made me whole, Jake Morrison. The cycles that followed were a symphony of discovery. They sat upon the porch, a king and queen of the neon gutter, exchanging the codes of their respective worlds. One night, while viewing the ancient celluloid of Earth, Xylara turned to him. Why do thy people not glow when they feel the hunger? Jake laughed, a sound that felt younger than it had in decades. We are creatures of hidden depths, Xylara. We keep our light in the dark. Show me, she whispered. Jake cued her face, his digits trembling. I love thee, he said, the words a raw, primitive frequency. Xylara's skin pulsed with a deep, rosy glow, her tears like falling diamonds. I love thee, Jake. Their kiss was a rupture in space-time, a shockwave that rattled the foundations of Horizon Lane. As they bonded, Jake felt his senses evolve. He could hear the static of the stars and the whispers of the earth. But the tragedy of the world would not be ignored. The neighborhood was a hive of suspicion. Elena had surrendered to the madness, shielding her brain with foil. Protesters gathered at the gate, their signs a crude dialect of hate. Jake felt the old anger, the bitterness of the sleeve. He moved to confront them, but Xylara's hand was a cooling balm. Let me speak to the meat, she said. She stepped into the street, her light a soothing, hypnotic frequency. She spoke of peace, of the fusion of worlds, her voice a melody that drowned out the discord. As she talked, flowers bloomed in the asphalt, their scent a chemical peace offering. The protesters, their primitive minds overwhelmed by the visual input, lowered their banners. Jake watched from the porch, a cynical pride swelling in his chest. His consort had conquered the mob with a smile. The bond deepened, a digital root system that connected their souls. Xylara taught him the manipulation of the local fields, the small magics of the light. One evening, beneath the cold gaze of the orbital eyes, she placed his hand upon the heat of her abdomen. "Canst thou feel the resonance?" At first, there was only the thrum of her core. Then, a tiny, high-frequency pulse answered him. A new life, a hybrid of the meat and the chrome. Jake's eyes filled with a salt that tasted of joy and terror. "A child." Xylara nodded, her glow a fierce, maternal white. "A bridge, Jake. A new code for a broken world." The garden erupted in a riot of bioluminescence, a celebration of the impossible. The months were a high-stakes preparation for the breach. Xylara's pregnancy was a fast-forward evolution, her body a shifting landscape of light and shadow. They prepared their cell for the arrival, the neighborhood watching with a mixture of awe and dread. Even Elena had returned to the fold, knitting tributes for the star-child. The night of the rupture, the sky blazed with an aurora that shamed the sun. Jake held Xylara's hand as she labored, her screams a beautiful, terrifying music. With a final surge of light, their daughter was born, a tiny, glowing sleeve of violet eyes and dark hair. Jake held her, and the weight of the universe felt suddenly manageable. "So Lori," he whispered, naming her for the lights that had heralded her arrival. So Lori grew with the speed of a digital virus, her abilities a unique fusion of her parents' codes. She could command the flora and rewrite the machine. Jake watched her play in the garden of alien thorns, a smile on his weathered face. Who would have thought? Xylara? A family of the gutter and the stars. Xylara leaned against him, her glow a warm, constant pulse. "Art thou content, Jake?" He looked at the garden, the beautiful, chaotic reality they had forged from the rut of his old life. "I am alive," he replied, pulling her into a kiss. So Lori laughed, her joy a physical light that rained down upon them like burning petals. They sat in the sanctuary of their garden, discussing the wars to come and the bridge their daughter would build. Jake held the light of his life in his hands and knew that the tragedy of his old age had been averted. "I never expected the excitement to come in this skin," he remarked, the cynicism of his past a distant memory. Xylara laughed, the sound a harmony for the ages. The sun set on the old world, casting a long, glowing shadow over Horizon Lane. Jake realized that the rut was gone, replaced by an adventure that would outlast his sleeve. As the stars awakened, he felt a peace that was as deep as the void. His life was no longer a routine, it was a revolution. To the dwellers of the dust who read this, know that the rut is a choice. The universe is a vast, brutalist landscape of opportunity, waiting for a soul brave enough to breach the routine. Jake found his light in the alien. Perhaps thou shalt find thine in the next dawn. Xylara rewrote the code of a dying man, and in doing so, she offered a new blueprint for the world. The union of the meat and the light is the only path forward in a world of digital shadows. Accept the difference, for in the fusion lies the strength to survive the vacuum. Be brave. Be open. Seek the glow in the gutter. For even in the greyest suburb, the stars are waiting to move in next door. May thy garden bloom with the fire of Vespera, and may thy heart find its Xyron in the beautiful, terrifying unknown.